One. Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, you Insider Indianapolis Star. This is Sunday, November 5th, 2023. Your mind your banners for Sunday, November 5th. He is Mike Niziolek from the Bloomington Herald-Times. And Mike, it was a pretty successful weekend for Indiana. Soccer won. I think volleyball went 1-1. Basketball won its exhibition as you'd expect. Football upset Wisconsin, although I know what the Vegas line was in real terms. Maybe we shouldn't have considered that quite so much an upset. I want to start with hoops. You had not seen that group in person yet, but you were there. We were all there Friday night. I guess just immediate takeaways from that game, acknowledging it's an NAIA opponent. It's everything it's going to be in an exhibition like that. But just, I guess, first impressions you walked out of that building with.
I think we talked about it. That's just an interesting mix of players, with the length and sort of the athleticism to run the floor between, a really interesting front court with Malik, McKenzie, and Khalil. I think it's going to come down to, honestly, how consistently they can score against good defensive teams. Mike Woodson's talked about he doesn't want to settle for just being a half court team and wants to run. And I think that's the only way this team's going to get past teams, to be honest. I don't know that their half court sets are, I think they need to be creative. And so I think they'll develop into an interesting team. I'm interested to see how they match up early, when they go to New York, how they do against Auburn. But I think there could be some bumps on the road early, just as they try to figure out kind of their identity and what works. And as they try to get more confidence, because I think you saw Khalil Ware is sort of a perfect example of that. The first half of both games looked tentative, was kind of scared to sort of take advantage of his skill set, his length at the basket. And then in the second half, he was dominant. So, and now he's going to be facing obviously stronger defenders. And this was a guy at Oregon last year that didn't score 20 points in a game. He had five starts there in the non-conference portion of the schedule, then sort of backed off. So I think they're going to have to work with him with his confidence level throughout the season. And McKenzie, obviously showed flashes, I think, in that second exhibition, but not consistent enough yet. So I think there's going to be, like I said, bumps in the road here the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a fascinating mix. I think it is, use the word mix. I think that's a good way to put it, because I'm not totally sure at all. Like there's this one, there's the old like melting pot salad bowl. Like, do the ingredients truly sort of come together? Or do they always remain a little distinct from one another? It feels like a mix right now, and the goal, I guess, is to get it to a blend. I don't know if that's being overly cliche, but you can see what the idea is, especially if you overlay it onto some of Mike Woodson's NBA rosters, the length that those rosters had, the extent to which, he always kind of had one dominant scorer in the NBA. In Atlanta, it was Joe Johnson. In New York, obviously, it was Carmelo Anthony. But he also always had guys that really fit certain roles. Steve Novak was this corner man shooting threes. I think there were probably, and I know he built the system a little differently around Trace Jackson Davis, but probably some comparisons between Trace Jackson Davis and Tyson Chandler. I think Khalil Ware, maybe a more seasoned, polished version of Khalil Ware he probably would have loved to have had with that Atlanta team that had so many kind of players that looked a lot more like Malik Renew or Mackenzie Mbako. Or Caleb Banks. And you can just,
Well, Mbako kind of reminds me of Josh Smith a little bit.
Yeah, and like I said, Renew reminds me a little bit of Al Horford, to be honest. Again, I'm speaking of, please understand, I'm speaking in these, Al Horford was the number 3 overall pick. He's played like 15 years in the NBA. I recognize what we're talking about here, but relative to kind of the way that, that what their roles are and how they're used, like I can see some of that in Malik Renew. And defensively, I think they could be really good, because they're so long. They're going to wear teams down. They're going to be able to take chances. And actually, I think the best version of this team is a team that is among the best teams and among the best in the country in basically turning opponents over and scoring rapidly off of turnovers. I don't think this is necessarily ever going to be a great half court team offensively.
No, they don't look like they're comfortable in that arena. I mean, and obviously
No,
it's still early, but I think that's going to be probably their toughest thing to overcome.
no, yeah, I think that, I mean, that can develop with time and as roles kind of crystallize, but I don't think they're going to be good in transition if they sort of maximize their defensive position potential in the way that all teams want to be good in transition. Like, I think they can be really, really good. I think they can be one of those teams that can just get out and fill lanes, and suddenly you've just got length and speed running at you, and it's just sort of like, well, like, I think at their best they're going to get fouled a lot because I just don't know how you're going to deal with some of the physical mismatches that they're going to present. But then on the other hand, I mean, it every question about that offense is going to remain, I think, for a while. Unless, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they go to New York, they blow everybody away, and they score 85 points a game. I'd be surprised. But in terms of roles, in terms of certain fundamentals like 3-point shooting, court spacing, floor spacing, all those different kinds of things, I just think that's the end of the floor, particularly in the half court, where I think if you're Indiana, you really have to maximize your margins early in the season. I mean, I thought it was, for example, a really good sign that through 2 preseason games, they only committed 12 turnovers. And yes, you're not facing teams that can be as disruptive to you, but when you're playing that fast and you're getting out in transition and you're running and you're trying to move really fast through your offense and you're still not turning it over a ton, that's a good sign, especially when you're still trying to fit some pieces together. I just think that
I think the caveat would be that, I don't know what the team looked like the first exhibition game. The second one, not a very big
no, but I
lineup
guess
that
my
they
point is
presented.
more, despite the fact that clearly guys aren't kind of plugged into one another yet, which you'd expect this early in the season for a very new team, they're not throwing the ball away a lot. There's not a like
No,
bad
no, but they
pass.
weren't challenged as much. Like, they this team wasn't getting out with them. And so,
Yeah.
when there's a little more pressure, are they as sharp? I think will be, because I think Woods had mentioned that, this team, especially the one they played, it was not, you know, not very large.
No, it wasn't. And it'll be interesting, to see the tests they get in these first couple games. Not even before UConn, frankly. Um, Florida Gulf Coast, I mean, Pat Chambers teams, tend to be a little bit more kind of defense oriented. Um, you're going to face Army. I don't think they're expected to be anything, particularly great. But then you get a Wright State team that, tends to kind of know what it's about. Been to a couple NCAA tournaments in the last few years, kind of consistently been one of the better teams in a decent kind of mid-major league. And then, of course, in the not very distant, I mean, we're only at this point 2 weeks away from the game against UConn. So you are going to get pushed. I can't get away from the extent to which this team's fortunes really turn on how much it can maximize its defensive potential, because that makes the length matter. If you understand what I'm saying, it
Right.
it allows them to be better in transition, which means they don't necessarily have to lean so heavily into their half court offense. It mitigates, maybe some of the. I think this team may be better shooting the 3 than people expect, though I don't expect it to be prolific shooting 3s. But if you're not going to be prolific shooting 3s, half court offense can become a slog. Whereas the more you can run, the more you can score on your break, your secondary break, the less you need to worry about like true sort of everybody out around court spacing. The more you're going to eat, the more you're either going to get to the rim or you're going to get the easy 3-point look because the defense isn't set yet, and you're moving the ball around quickly and you're moving it up quickly. And I think
Well, I mean,
all
if you
of
looked at
that
the
is
box
predicated
score,
on the defensive, just optimizing this defense as much as possible.
if you looked at the box score from Friday, and I think Woodson would take 9 of 17 from three, and I mean, obviously the percentage at free throw, but even the volume 21 of 25. I mean, those numbers are winning numbers. I think no matter what game you're playing, 9 of 17 from three, with each of your front court guys hitting at least one. And Baco had three, Renew had two, and really almost nothing from kind of your guards. So I mean, that's sort of a winning formula. I don't think that they can rely on that every day, but meaning if they got just a little of that each game, like we talked about, I think after the game, you pose that threat, and it's a difference maker. I think they do need a little of that, maybe not as much, especially from where you probably don't want him that far from the basket all the time. But we
If you're going to play those
Mackenzie
bigger
sort
front courts, it's only going to work if you can have enough nights where you have like a situation. I think there was one point where those three starting forward, center, however you want to classify them, were a combined 6 of 9 from three. Now that's not prolific. That's not going to shoot anybody out of the gym. But you need, if you're going to play bigger up front, and and Indiana kind of has to, if it's going to be this long athletic team that's really tough and gets a lot of rebounds and steals and just clogs up all the passing lanes and gambles on switches. I mean, they're switching everything, like literally everything. They need that size to make that work. On the other end, they're not going to have somebody who makes 153s this year, obviously. So what they need is enough threat from those big guys that it just carries kind of the weight that says you better at least go close out Malik Renew, because if he's wide open, 50% of the time it's going to, and if he's not wide open, 20% of the time it's going to go in. But if you're going out and making sure he's not wide open, then the lane's vacant.
And what kind of offensive player Mackenzie Mbako is, where he develops his strength, because he got a lot of sort of just in the mix, like in transition here and there, but didn't really have much run towards him. I thought, obviously limited, I played 21 minutes, but how he developed sort of in the offensive system, like what they rely on him for, especially the half court sets. Kind of an intriguing, that he could do a little bit of everything, but what's his strength? Like where does he go? What's his go-to sort of spot on the floor? We don't know that yet. Obviously we haven't seen a ton of them, but that could be a key going forward too, because he's probably the guy that you think might be the leading scorer on the team, just because of his versatility, because he can hit the outside shot a little better than Ware. Obviously, really gets out and transition well, but I'm not sure what he does best.
No, I think that's a fair question. I thought it was Ryan Carrazza, a good friend of the podcast over at Inside the Hall, was posting some quick film hits from the Marian game, and he showed Mbako hitting a three off a floppy action, which is like if you've ever played NBA 2K, it's one of like the base plays in NBA 2K. It's basically just sending a 3-point shooter to the baseline and then freeing them up on a down screen from a big to pop out to the wing. And as Ryan pointed out in that tweet, and he had the accompanying GIF or whatever, Indiana did a lot of that last year, but it was to create a post up. It was to create a situation where you'd pull two players to the basically the non-play side of the floor. The point guard would be at the top of the key, and the wing would pop out, which would leave the big able to post. And the wing would throw it to the big, and then we get to Trace Jackson Davis, Race Thompson, sometimes Malik Renew, and Indiana would go from there. In that moment, Malik Renew just fired up a three and it went in. And it's one of those things where I mean, I don't want to. He's not Larry Bird, obviously, but I wonder if he's one of those players that doesn't have one defined strength, and actually, like, part of the strength is just the fact that he's 6'8". Like in that moment, his defender doesn't even really do a terrible job on coming through the screen and getting a hand up, but like there's a difference between getting a hand up on a 6'2" guard and a 6'8" wing. Like,
Yeah.
you got to get a lot closer to close the shooting window for a guy like that. And somebody pointed out, I retweeted it, and somebody pointed out in my mentions like how good his footwork. Like, he's setting his feet while he's still turning his body. Like, he turns his feet and sets his feet while his body is still turning toward the basket. So like the shooting motion is quick, it's smooth. I just wonder if there's like an extent to which it's, with Jalen Hoshifino, we would always say he's good at the rim, he's good in the mid range. Those were the things that really worked for him. And there were nights where he'd find kind of his range from three, and that would work as well. With Mbako, it may be a strength and maybe some nights it's a weakness, but I just wonder if there's an extent to which basically his strength is he's a 6'8" scorer. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean he's going to score 28 a night, but it means like, who do you guard him with? And I think about the Murray brothers at Iowa in recent years, Johnny Davis at Wisconsin. It's sort of one of those where I don't know if he necessarily produces at that kind of volume. Those guys were also a little older, to be fair. They'd had a couple years in college before they were really expected to be 20-point a game guys. But on any given night, and Indiana certainly fell victim to this, you'd face this guy and you'd be like, well, who do you guard him with? Because if you guard him with
Yeah.
a big, he's too slow. And if you guard him with a guard, he's too small. And you can tell Trey Galloway to get up in Chris Murray's face or Keegan Murray's face all you want, but Keegan Murray is 4.5 inches taller than Trey Galloway. So
Yeah.
the closeout has to be so much quicker, and it just doesn't work. I wonder if he's, especially on a team where it already feels like we're going to be talking about, a different leading scorer, every third night or every fourth night. Some nights it'll be Ware, some nights it'll be Mbako, some nights it'll be, Xavier Johnson, whoever. Not a team where it's so clearly defined. It's like it's Trace Jackson Davis, Jalen Hood-Schifino, and then everybody else just fills in around them. I just wonder if like the strength for him is more just that as the season wears on and Indiana figures out the stuff that it wants to run specifically for him, he's just a really hard cover because of his length, his size, his athleticism, and his range of skill when he can stretch you offensively all the way out to the 3-point line.
Spinning that forward, obviously they haven't been put in a situation and we don't know when they will, but like they need a basket on a final possession of a game. Who does the ball go to? Especially early in the season when they're trying to figure things out. I don't, obviously I wouldn't, is it Mbako, like you said, because of his range of skills and because of it's a defensive mismatch? Is it just a play they feel comfortable with?
Yeah, I wonder if it's action defined for a little while. If it's a little bit less like put the ball in this guy's hands and just let
Because it
it
was Trace,
work.
obviously, before, now
Right.
it's like it's wide open, and I'm
It's
not sure there is an answer.
I wonder if it's a little bit more obviously opponent specific and a little bit more kind of like, well, this is what we're good at right now. So
Yeah.
it's Xavier Johnson tonight because we think for whatever reason this team's not guarding our pick and roll well from this side of the floor or whatever, and we'll go float Mbako to the corner and we'll do this, and he'll have options. I don't, I mean, and again, like I'm it's one of the many things I'm curious about, like, is there an alpha or a couple alphas on this team? Because that is the one thing, as much as we talk about, Mike Woodson's teams were never so sort of post reliant in the pros, and they were never so sort of pigeonholed onto two players and all that. The flip side was he did still have that one guy. He had Joe Johnson, he had Carmelo Anthony. He
Joe
still had,
Johnson would have shot the ball from under the opposing team's basket if he
oh
needed
yeah,
to.
Joe Johnson, and listen, there were nights where it was to the Hawks' detriment. Believe me, I watched. But
You want to talk about a guy that was not afraid to shoot the ball.
but
Yeah,
but the point is, the flip side was there were nights where Johnson was basically just kind of that one level below the really elite scorers in the NBA.
yeah, no, but I get your point. Like, do they have somebody when like things are not going well, or they're having a bad night as a team that could take over, that could be that guy that
I think that
not,
if that player's on this roster, I think it has to be Mbako, and I think it's as much the mismatch he presents. I mean, it is also worth saying, and I'm looking at the numbers right now. He only shot 2 free throws, but as you said, he only played 21 minutes on Friday night. I think on Sunday he shot 6. So he shot 8. He took 8 field goals and shot 2 free throws against Marian. if you look at the U Indy game, and I'm like literally just this is just like on air admin, like I'm doing math on air. He shot 6 free throws to 11 field goals. So basically 8 free throws to 19 field goals is a free throw rate of about 42%. Now, for just like just as a point of comparison, last season, Trace Jackson Davis's free throw rate was 46.7%.
Hmm.
2 years ago, in a full season, Xavier Johnson's free throw rate was 45.5%. The flip side, if you're trying to find somebody that maybe played the game the way Mbako plays it, and really there wasn't anybody, frankly, that played the game the way Mbako plays it. In terms of his position, his size, his length, all that on Indiana's roster last year. But if you want to compare him even to Jalen Hood-Schifino's free throw rate was only 18.9%.
So,
So I think he is much more kind of in the, and like, again, that free throw rate was what, like 42.6, I think is what I said.
yeah.
In conference play last year, Trace Jackson Davis's free throw rate was 43.6%. That was fifth in the Big Ten in conference games. So like he's much more, through 2 exhibition games, admittedly, he's showing that potential of being the sort of player that, like, even if maybe he's not totally polished offensively, even if there's not kind of that one defined skill where you just say like that is something he is so good at, you cannot stop it when he's on, like Jalen Hood-Schifino in the mid-range against Purdue last year, where he just went absolutely insane. Um, I think he may be one of those guys that is just going to wind up being so tough to guard that you can't put him down. You can't. There's nothing. You can't pin him down. It's probably a better way to put it. And I go back to the Johnny Davis comparison. I know you probably won't have remembered this game. I don't know why you would have watched it. Indiana played Wisconsin February 15th, 2022. So this is Woodson's first season. And Indiana led for most of this game. Indiana's win expectancy peaked at, I think, about 85, 86%. And this is with like 4 minutes left. So, I mean, like it looked for all the world, even with like 2 minutes left, Indiana's win expectancy, according to Ken Palm, was about 80%. So it looked for all the world like Indiana was going to win this game. And Johnny Davis just took over. He finished with 30 points. He was 10 of 15 from the floor, and he was 10 of 14 from the free throw line. And it was just like they'd actually kept Davis pretty quiet most of the game. And then Wisconsin basically just went to an offense where they were just clearing out one side of the floor and just saying, you don't have anyone that can guard this guy. He's going to score or you're going to foul him.
Hmm.
And it worked. Davis had 30 points and Wisconsin came back and won the game. And I don't think Mackenzie Mbako is Johnny Davis 2.0 by any means, which, they're obviously different sorts of players. But like, I think that's probably what we're talking about here is you put the ball in Mackenzie Mbako's hands and you bank on the idea that most teams aren't going to have somebody who can defend him without fouling him.
Yeah, and I mean it could work, and I'm just it's like, how confident is he on the offensive end? I mean, he looks good running the floor and in transition, but when he's facing a guy that is capable of guarding him or does have some length that matches up, I mean, can he flip a switch like that as a true freshman without any experience under his belt? And those are questions that obviously we won't get answers to until later this month, obviously. But his ceiling is probably where the ceiling is for this team too. I mean, I think they need him and Ware to be their sort of best players and most productive players. And if they struggle, I think this team's going to struggle. And I don't think that's sort of being anything, kind of crazy talk. I just think that they could swing wildly from night to night, I think.
I think the one other thing I would say, and it is early, but I think this is something you can rely on. And then I want to turn and talk about football. Those 2 veteran guards, like the as much as we talk about that front court and figuring some things out, and that bench and figuring some things out, and I think Anthony Walker and Peyton Sparks, once he's healthy again, should be kind of maybe more impactful than we might have expected early in the season. But I can't get away from, when I watch that team, the fact that you've got those 2 guards who are combined in their 10th season of college basketball together. One's in his fourth year, one's in his sixth year, and it just it you know it even then. I know you didn't see the UND game, but again, listen, these are exhibition games against lower division teams, and there's no pressure. Even if you lose them, I mean, I can remember it felt like Syracuse lost one of its exhibitions every third year, and they'd still go to the Elite Eight for a while. The but like the thing one of the things I could not kind of get away from, even in that UND game, the offense isn't working, whatever. It never felt like they let anything kind of creep in terms of, just like getting rushed, getting antsy, getting nervous. And it always felt in part because it was like at any given moment, there were two guys on the floor, or at least one of those two guys on the floor that could just get the ball in their hands and just say, everyone calm down and run it. We know everything. We know the offense inside and out. We're going to know all the coverages. We're going to know all the opponents. Once we get to begin play, we're going to be able to tell you with our eyes closed what these teams are doing. I just like that is something that I think probably should not, like, it's probably going to wind up sort of like, let's say Indiana surprises with a couple results. Maybe they get a big win in New York and they beat Kansas. And at Christmas, everyone's kind of like, oh, Indiana looks more interesting than we thought they might look, or they start 2-0 with those two Big Ten games in December or something. I think everybody's going to, in that scenario, everyone would, I suspect, be talking about all the new faces and the big front court and all that. And I think the thing that maybe should not get lost about this team, if things do go well earlier than maybe expected, is the importance of just having those two steady veteran guards that will always kind of keep you level.
No, and that makes sense. And, especially on the road, those guys are going to be guys you can lean on. When these guys, you don't have battles in Madison Square Garden. I mean, I can imagine that those guys will be important to sort of getting this team sort of focused and getting those jitters out. And, I think in the first play of the Marian game, it was Xavier Johnson. He hits a layup, and then the first time trying to even get down the floor, he gets a steal. I mean, those things can go overlooked, but I mean, it sort of set the tone, right? Like, I mean, right away off the bat, he's leading the way. And Trey Galloway didn't have a ton of stats, but he had a physical layup that he got shoved to the floor for, and those small plays I think give your younger guys confidence that these guys have your back.
Football, we'll do about 8-10 minutes on it. Indiana 20, Wisconsin 6-14. I said this on our post game video, and I forget who I was having a conversation with. My wife and I wound up at Nick's briefly Saturday night. I just said that the thing in a game like that for Indiana is the underdog, but not nearly as undermanned as Wisconsin. Teams like Indiana lose those games when they shouldn't, when they beat themselves, when they make mistakes that aren't necessarily forced. It's cats. Yes, they make cats. And no turnovers. They finished even with Wisconsin on sacks allowed, and they committed 2 penalties. And it just, I mean, we talk so much about special teams mistakes in recent weeks. The only real gaffe in that area is the missed field goal, which, like, you have to account for missing a field goal every once in a while. That's not a mistake. It's just, kickers aren't perfect. They did not beat themselves. And for a team that is clearly still, limited in some ways, working through some things, an offense that's really basically in week 4, not week 9. And we can have a whole separate conversation about why, but the key to me was just, they did not hurt themselves, and they didn't make it easy for Wisconsin to hurt them either. There was basically just kind of the one penalty that extended the drive that ended in a touchdown, but everything else was just kind of like they made Wisconsin have to beat them straight up. And that was on a day when Wisconsin didn't really have the horses to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the defense we saw, I think, against Ohio State, the defense we saw against Louisville. I mean, look, Louisville's almost in the playoff hunt now. I mean, this is the closest team to play, outside their loss. And so, I mean, this is the defense that we thought looked pretty good and had, had a terrible run. I don't know if they lost their confidence or just needed more time to sort of kind of come together, but played the last 2 weeks really well. I mean, obviously the one play, the 50-yard touchdown, sort of a collision between two defensive backs, and one got tripped up, and the ref was actually kind of acted as a pick there a little bit too. But other than that, it was a pretty clean game. Like, you should be dominating a team that's playing their third string running back and backup quarterback, but I think it was an important performance, and Aaron Casey obviously in the fourth quarter dominated the game, but that's what they're going to need sort of going forward. Because I think they're limited. You mentioned the offense. Their ceiling is probably 20 to 28 points right now. Without a special teams touchdown, without some sort of gaff by the other team, I don't really trust this team scoring more than 3 touchdowns. Maybe right now 2's kind of been the limit. And so if you're going to win these last 3 games, you're going to need defensive performances like this, because like you said, the offense is just such a work in progress, and like it'll look good. That first half had some strong drives, and in the second half, you wouldn't trust them to get 3 yards.
And it is interesting, because now you face, I don't know if the wins, I'll look at the Big Ten standings before I spit this out. At the start of play Saturday, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan State, and Purdue occupied the bottom 4 spots, essentially, across the 2 divisions. That is still the case, probably based on tiebreakers and stuff. Purdue's 1-5 in the conference. Illinois beat Minnesota on the road. Good win. Came back last minute drive, but they're still 2-4. Michigan State and Indiana are both 1-5. And if you look at standard stats, and I know some people like and I admittedly do too, some of the Football Outsider stuff, the Bill Connolly stuff, I just don't have it in front of me. By most standard metrics, I mean, Illinois, Michigan State, Indiana, and Purdue are the bottom 4 teams in the conference in scoring defense. Illinois is 8th in scoring offense. Indiana is 12th. Purdue is 9th. Michigan State is 14th. Purdue and Illinois can move the ball a little bit, I think, by virtue of the fact that they pass the ball well. But they all have turnover issues. In fact, in some ways, frankly, one of the things that Indiana might lean on a little bit is that Indiana's a little bit less turnover prone. I mean, Indiana's got 12 turnovers this season. Purdue's got 14. Illinois' got 17. Michigan State's got 19. My point here is, you talk about the defensive performance. You talk about basically where this team can win, and like how this team can find its way to winning these games, like Wisconsin, and certainly moving forward this weekend to Illinois. They look statistically a lot like the teams they're about to play offensively. They are probably a little bit better defensively, certainly than Michigan State and Purdue. Illinois' got some good individual players, but in the whole, that hasn't always shown up this year. If you're Indiana, you've stacked a couple good performances in a row now for the first time in a long time. You've got to basically just find your way, I think, to essentially just put the pedal on the floor anytime it feels like that offense has some momentum, and just give don't limit your mistakes as much as possible. Give your defense the best possible chances to succeed, because Indiana, I'm not saying they're going to, but they can win all 3 of these games. I mean, matchup wise, Indiana has weaknesses against these 3 teams, but Indiana also has what I think are probably, at least on paper, some pronounced strengths against each of these 3 teams, including, or starting with, I guess you'd say, Illinois.
Yeah, and one thing they got to get fixed in here in the next 4 days. I mean, they're going to need to run the ball at some point, more so than just Brandon Sorsby scrambling around with the ball in one of his hands. That's really been their only production. Because you mentioned Illinois State's, got a solid defense, or at times can be. And so, and you don't want to let, in the second half, Wisconsin had the ball the entire time. You can't have that. You're putting, when this team loses, it's because the defense just runs out of steam. They're down a couple guys too. Now they're playing some freshmen. Jordan Shaw is one of them that's kind of stepped in, and they can't be playing, 25 minutes and a half, 22 minutes and a half. And so they got to figure out a way, I think, going forward here quickly to try, because their interior run game is just a mess. And anytime they swing out on short swing passes or try to screen, that's also a mess. And those kind of act as run plays, and they haven't been able to do either. And so they're not a team that can string drives together for any sort of long basis, and that sort of hurt them in the second half because like Wisconsin had just like 5 chances in the fourth quarter to tie that game, and luckily the defense made a play each time, but really testing fate there, I thought, in the fourth quarter.
The one thing, and I'll give you the last word about a minute. They have given themselves this opportunity. We said that the absolute minimum they needed to do was get to Illinois with no more than 6 wins. And we always knew that, Illinois, Michigan State, Purdue looked like just by an order of magnitude, the most manageable section of the schedule. There's no margin for error, but on the other hand, they're probably playing their best football of the season, at least across these last 2 games. David, I mean, I don't know, 30, 40 seconds, because we got to cut this off before the podcast dies on us, but they've at least given themselves this window, and now it'll be fascinating to know if they can climb through it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not a team that obviously could feel, you get overconfident or cocky. I mean, they've played some bad football this year, so I think they've realized sort of what, this is not a team that's gonna go. We got the world on our backs. I mean, no, that's not really how they see it. They've had to scrape and claw for literally everything. Do they get tired out at some point? Is that now? Illinois is going to be riding high. They were on the road last week at Minnesota. It's going to be a coin flip game. I think Illinois was favored by 7 points. I thought that was a little high. But to me, it's a 50-50 game. You could lay out any scenario, blowout, close game for either side. And sure, why not? I think it's not one of those games you have a real good feel for. Do you? I mean, can you, with any sort of certainty of confidence?
Well, I mean, I think it is a coin flip game, and I've seen Indiana win enough of those and lose enough of those in the last 6 to 8 years that it's all about one little bit of a game plan that pays off, or somebody's sick, or somebody shows up, or somebody doesn't. It'll be fascinating to watch. We'll be there for that. Florida Gulf Coast Tuesday, soccer Wednesday, more basketball Sunday. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Manners for November 5th, 2023. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.